Say, I am sure of myself as a person. I'm sure of my talent. And to me, and I'm sure of my love and for life and that sort of thing, I'm very content.
For decades, Dolly Parton has been the reigning queen of country, beloved by fans, respected by critics, and rarely caught holding a grudge. Or so we thought. Now, at 79, Dolly's legendary poise masks a history filled with backstage betrayals, bruised egos, and a few famous names she swore she'd never forgive. Some crossed her, some dismissed her, and one nearly stole her spotlight for good. Ready to discover the rivalries Dolly never wanted you to hear? Let's unravel the list. Just be warned. The last name might just knock the rhinestones off your boots. Porter Wagoner, mentor, maestro, and the man who sued her heart out. It all started under the glare of television lights. When Dolly Parton joined the Porter Wagoner show in 1967, she was already a gifted songwriter and singer. But Porter held the keys to the country music kingdom. He introduced her to a national audience, guided her career, and, for a while, seemed genuinely invested in her success. On stage, their harmonies were perfect. Off-stage, cracks quickly formed. Porter was fiercely proud, quick to take credit, and as Dolly's fame grew, slow to share the spotlight. What started as mentorship turned into rivalry. By the early 70s, Dolly's star was rising fast. Too fast for Porter's comfort. At first, Dolly tried to stick it out, staying loyal to the man who had given her a shot. But the more her records sold and her songwriting talent shone, the more controlling Porter became. In private, friends remembered tense arguments, slammed dressing room doors, and whispered threats about contracts and loyalty. Porter had built his empire on the myth that he discovered Dolly, and he wasn't about to let her rewrite that history. Dolly, meanwhile, chafed under the pressure. She wanted independence, creative control, and the freedom to be more than just Porter's protégé. When Dolly finally announced her intention to leave the show in 1974, it wasn't just a career move, it was a declaration of war. Porter took the departure as a personal betrayal. He felt abandoned, humiliated, and overshadowed by the woman he'd helped make famous. But Dolly wasn't backing down. She wrote, "I Will Always Love You," as her bittersweet farewell, a song laced with gratitude and pain. The world heard heartbreak. Porter heard rejection. The fallout was swift and ugly. In 1979, 5 years after Dolly's departure, Porter filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against her, claiming breach of contract and demanding a share of her future earnings. The suit rocked Nashville, setting off a media frenzy and forcing Dolly to defend herself both legally and emotionally. For the public, the feud was a shock. How could the king of country turn so viciously against his own queen? For Dolly, it was even worse. She later admitted that the lawsuit nearly broke her spirit. She struggled with depression, anxiety, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Behind closed doors, the legal teams battled. Dolly's lawyers argued she had honored every contract, while Porter's side insisted she owed him everything. The court case dragged on, damaging both reputations. Fans took sides. Rumors swirled about secret settlements, personal vendettas, and backroom threats. Yet even as she suffered, Dolly never lashed out publicly. She poured her pain into music, showing the world grace in the face of cruelty. Eventually, Dolly and Porter reached a settlement. In later years, they managed a reconciliation of sorts. Dolly visited him in the hospital as his health declined, and when he died in 2007, she was among the first to pay tribute. But the scars never fully faded. Dolly learned a harsh lesson. Sometimes, the people who build you up are the quickest to tear you down when you threaten their legacy. Was it forgiveness or just survival? no matter what. Dolly never let herself get caught off guard again. As she once said, "I never forgot what that taught me." If Porter's betrayal was the price of freedom, Dolly paid it and then some. And if you thought the legal drama was bad, just wait until you hear about the voice that nearly eclipsed her own. Linda Ronstadt and Emmylou Harris, the trio that broke more than hearts. You might think that three legendary voices joining forces would be the stuff of country music dreams, a chart-topping supergroup with nothing but sisterhood, shared glory, and award show tears. But behind the sweet harmonies and studio perfection of Dolly Parton, Linda Ronstadt, and Emmylou Harris, there was another truth simmering just beneath the surface: egos, creative clashes, and an alliance so fragile that it nearly shattered more than once. The story begins in the late 70s. By then, Dolly was already on her way to global superstardom, busting through the boundaries of country music with crossover hits, TV shows, and even movie roles. Linda Ronstadt had conquered rock and pop, while Emmylou Harris brought a haunting, ethereal edge to Americana and folk. Their voices were so different that only a musical miracle could blend them, but they made it happen. At least, that's what the record label hoped. The dream was simple: take three powerhouse women at the peak of their creative powers and let them create magic in the studio. On paper, it looked perfect. In reality, it was a producer's nightmare. Linda was famously meticulous, rehearsing and recording until every note was flawless. She had opinions about arrangements, about instrumentation, about how the blend of their voices should hit the ear. Emmylou, meanwhile, was all about feeling, instinctive, soulful, and sometimes unpredictable. She brought a love for old-time country, bluegrass, and Appalachian ballads. Dolly, in the middle, was juggling blockbuster solo projects, her own TV specials, and a business empire that was growing by the month. That first recording session set the tone: three superstars, three visions, and a million tiny disagreements. Sometimes the arguments were about music. Linda wanted a precise, almost classical sound. Emmylou and Dolly pushed for rawness and heart. Sometimes the issues ran deeper. Whose name would go first? Who would sing lead on which song? How would royalties be divided? A close friend of all three remembers it was like watching three sisters, but sisters who didn't always want to share the toys. Despite the drama, the chemistry was undeniable. The trio's harmonies soared. Songs like "To Know Him Is to Love Him" and "Wildflowers" sounded like something plucked from the heavens. But the tension never really went away. Linda could be blunt, Emmylou could be stubborn, and Dolly, though always diplomatic in public, was never afraid to dig her heels in if she thought her vision was being sidelined. Outside the studio, things got even trickier. Record labels were notorious for fueling rivalries, planting stories in the press about diva behavior, missed deadlines, or creative differences. One tabloid even ran a headline suggesting that Dolly was too busy being a Hollywood star to care about the project, a jab that stung, given how much the album meant to her. And then, after years of planning, postponing, and second-guessing, Trio finally dropped in 1987. The release was an event. Critics raved. The album climbed the charts, scooping up awards and introducing the world to the kind of harmony that only happens once in a generation. Yet, even in the glow of success, it was clear the collaboration would never be permanent. The trio had achieved a moment of unity, but at a cost. The follow-up albums took years, and subsequent sessions were marked by the same old tensions. The friendships survived, but the dream of a long-running supergroup died quietly. Looking back, Dolly was candid but careful. In her autobiography, she said, "We loved each other, but we all had our own ways. Emmylou and Linda echoed those sentiments in interviews, always stopping short of outright criticism, but making it clear that the project was, at times, more struggle than celebration. It was a hard lesson for all three. Sometimes, even the most perfect harmony is fragile, and the higher you climb, the harder it gets to stay on the same page. Fans, of course, sensed something was up. At awards shows, when one member skipped the red carpet or a reunion tour fizzled before it started, the whispers returned. Was it egos? Was it money? Was it just too many stars in one room? Nobody said it directly, but the answer was clear in every awkward interview and every polite, half-smiling reunion. The dream had been real, but it was always on the verge of falling apart. And yet, there's one detail that almost nobody outside the Nashville bubble knows. In the late 90s, after Linda's health forced her to cut back on performing, Dolly quietly tried to revive the trio. She called Emmylou, she reached out to Linda, and she even booked secret studio time. The sessions were tense, the magic was hard to recapture, and the album never materialized. Instead, Dolly shelved the tapes and never spoke of it again, a silent acknowledgement that some chapters are best left unfinished. What really happened behind closed doors? Was the tension about music, fame, or something deeper? Maybe the simple fact that there can only ever be one true queen? For all the success of Trio, the story ended not with a bang, but with a long, echoing silence. Sometimes, the most beautiful voices in the world cannot drown out the noise of ambition, pride, and the desire to be remembered in your own right. But as the final harmonies faded and the stars went their separate ways, Dolly learned a lesson she'd never forget. Even friendship and music have their limits, and sometimes the cost of greatness is paid in things you cannot repair. And if you thought three divas in one studio was dramatic, just wait until you hear how Dolly's greatest song became a global sensation and nearly erased her name from her own legacy. Whitney Houston, the voice that overshadowed the Queen. In the world of pop music, few moments have left a mark as deep as the night Whitney Houston stood on stage, eyes closed, voice soaring, singing "I Will Always Love You" to a stunned and breathless crowd. In that moment, Whitney did not just cover Dolly Parton's song. She turned it into an anthem so powerful that for years, the world forgot who wrote it in the first place. Behind the applause, though, was a hidden tension that only a handful of insiders could feel. This was not just the story of a song. This was a story about credit, legacy, and what happens when even a living legend gets upstaged by her own masterpiece. Dolly Parton first wrote "I Will Always Love You" as a bittersweet farewell, a tender goodbye to her mentor and longtime collaborator Porter Wagoner. The song was already a country classic, topping charts and turning heartbreak into poetry. But when The Bodyguard hit theaters in 1992 and Whitney's voice tore through the chorus, the song became something else entirely. It became the soundtrack to heartbreak on a global scale, a power ballad played at weddings, funerals, and every karaoke bar on the planet. For months, Whitney's version ruled the airwaves. It broke records, won awards, and made her a legend for a new generation. But beneath the glittering success, something strange began to happen. For the first time in her career, Dolly found herself playing second fiddle to her own creation. Interviewers would ask about Whitney's version with an edge of awe, barely mentioning that Dolly was the original genius behind the lyrics. Radio DJs would introduce the track as Whitney Houston's classic, not realizing the woman who had written it was still alive and performing, very much in her prime. For a while, the royalties poured in, but the recognition faded. Dolly's voice was everywhere, but her name was whispered less and less. Behind the scenes, The industry started to whisper. Did Dolly resent Whitney for eclipsing her? Did she feel erased from her own legacy? The Nashville rumor mill went into overdrive. Some fans speculated that Dolly must have felt slighted, maybe even betrayed, by the overwhelming success of Whitney's version. Yet in public, Dolly was unflappable. She praised Whitney's voice and called the cover a gift, even confessing in interviews that she wept the first time she heard it. "It was so beautifully done that I cried," she told reporters, her signature smile never faltering. What Dolly never revealed until years later, however, was just how close she came to losing control of the song forever. Before The Bodyguard, a major producer approached her about selling the publishing rights outright for a tempting sum. Dolly politely declined, sensing the song's potential to become something more. It was a decision that would later make her tens of millions in royalties and give her the financial freedom to buy entire blocks of Nashville real estate. On paper, Dolly won the business war, but emotionally, she faced something more complex. There was a cost to being so gracious. As the accolades piled up for Whitney, Dolly sometimes felt the sting of invisibility. Journalists would ask her how it felt to be covered by such a powerhouse, as if she were a relic from the past. It was a backhanded compliment, one that even Dolly's armor could not always deflect. When asked in a rare, unguarded moment if she ever wished she had sung the definitive version herself, Dolly hesitated before admitting, "Sometimes I do wonder how the story might have gone if I had been the one the world heard first." It was the closest she ever came to confessing the bittersweet taste of her own success. Industry insiders have long wondered whether Dolly's strategy, quiet, calculated, always diplomatic, was a deliberate choice. Some say she played the long game, letting Whitney have the spotlight but never giving up her rights. Others say Dolly simply understood the power of patience, knowing the world would eventually remember who had written the words that made them weep. The truth, as always, is more complicated. For a while, it looked like Whitney had won the public's heart. But Dolly was winning a quieter war, one fought with contracts, copyrights, and the kind of poise that few could match. Yet, for all the professional courtesy, there were moments of quiet frustration. When the Grammy Awards rolled around and Whitney's performance took center stage, Dolly was left out of the major categories, recognized only as a songwriter. It was a subtle slight that did not go unnoticed by Nashville insiders. The country establishment bristled at the idea of their queen being overshadowed, even as Dolly insisted she was proud and grateful. As time passed, the narrative began to shift. People started to remember that Dolly was the mind behind the music. Documentaries, tribute concerts, and country music retrospectives began to give her the credit she was owed. Younger artists cited her as an influence, and "I Will Always Love You" was once again tied to her name. But the ghost of that first erasure lingered. Dolly had learned a lesson about fame. Sometimes your biggest hit can also be your most complicated legacy. Fans have often wondered how close the friendship between Dolly and Whitney really was. The truth is that while the two women respected each other, their paths rarely crossed in person. They shared mutual admiration from afar, exchanging kind words through interviews but never collaborating on stage. It was a strange kind of kinship, one built on a song that belonged to both of them, yet somehow also to the world. If Dolly ever felt slighted, she never let it show. She kept singing, kept writing, and kept turning life's heartbreaks into hits. She watched as "I Will Always Love You" became a standard, performed by everyone from school children to global superstars. She saw the song outlive trends, outlast critics, and become part of the fabric of American music. But every time Whitney's version soared through a speaker, there was a subtle reminder. Fame is fickle. Credit can be fleeting. Even legends can find themselves standing in the shadow of their own creation. And just when you think Dolly had faced every challenge a songwriter could endure, another complication would rise. What happens when the next generation, your own family even, tries to break out of your shadow and rewrite the rules you lived by? For Dolly, the lesson of Whitney Houston was clear. Greatness attracts both admiration and competition. And sometimes your legacy can be borrowed again, and finally reclaimed. But how do you keep control of your story when even your own goddaughter sets the world ablaze in a way you never could have imagined? Kenny Rogers, the duet partner who tested her patience. Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers. To the world, their friendship was the stuff of legend. Islands in the Stream became a country anthem, and their chemistry on stage was so charming that fans could not imagine anything but harmony. But dig beneath the rhinestone sparkle, and there is a story of rivalry, professional envy, and the kind of friction that only happens when two superstars share one spotlight. In the early 1980s, both Dolly and Kenny were dominating country radio and crossing over into pop stardom. Their voices blended perfectly, but their ambitions sometimes clashed. Producers and managers would jockey for better song placements, headline billing, and even photo angles in magazine covers. On tour, there were quiet negotiations about whose name would appear first on the marquee and who would close the show. For two larger-than-life personalities, there was never room for second best. Kenny, ever the showman, could be headstrong and opinionated, sometimes pushing for creative control or last-minute changes to set lists. Dolly, no stranger to taking charge herself, had learned to stand her ground in a business that rarely let women lead. When creative differences flared, the air would crackle with tension. In studio sessions, tempers sometimes ran hot. Both were perfectionists, and if one thought the other was phoning it in, neither would hold back their opinion. But it wasn't just the music. Friends say the pair sometimes sparred over business decisions. As the 80s turned into the 90s, Kenny's style started to feel a bit old-fashioned to some Nashville insiders, while Dolly was reinventing herself yet again, writing, acting, and building her empire. Kenny, feeling the pressure, once confided to a journalist that he never wanted to play second fiddle to anyone, even a friend. Dolly, always gracious in public, made sure to praise Kenny's talent, but she was quietly determined to carve out her own legacy, with or without his approval. There were even rumors that, at the height of their popularity, Kenny was jealous of Dolly's solo success. Some Nashville insiders whispered that a planned reunion album in the late 90s fell apart because neither star would compromise on creative control or profit splits. Others say it was a simple case of two busy icons moving in different directions. But either way, the dream team was on pause for years, and the friendship cooled. Despite the bumps, Dolly and Kenny always found their way back to each other, reuniting for television specials, and later, a farewell duet performance before Kenny's passing. Both spoke kindly about the other, but for those who knew them best, there was always a little friendly fire behind the scenes. The rivalry pushed them, challenged them, and kept their partnership legendary. And maybe that's Dolly's secret. She never truly hated her rivals. Instead, she turned competition into motivation, heartbreak into hit songs, and bitterness into longevity. With Kenny, as with everyone on this list, Dolly managed to transform every challenge into art, and every grudge into another reason to smile. But ask anyone who has worked with her and they'll tell you, Dolly Parton may be sweet, but she never lets herself be overshadowed. In the world of country music, even legends are not immune to a little old-fashioned rivalry. Miley Cyrus, when family fame turns to fire. When the tabloids first caught wind that Dolly Parton was the godmother of Miley Cyrus, it sounded like a match made in country pop heaven. On the surface, their relationship was painted as pure Southern charm, mentor and protege, country icon and rising Disney star, tradition guiding rebellion. But the truth is far more complicated. Behind every polite soundbite and supportive statement lies a tapestry of pride, concern, and the constant tug-of-war between generations. When your goddaughter explodes into global infamy, reinventing herself at every turn, how do you protect your own legacy while letting her carve her own path? Dolly's connection to Miley stretches back to the earliest days of Hannah Montana, when Billy Ray Cyrus asked his old friend to become a guiding hand for his daughter. Dolly did not just accept the role, she embraced it. She appeared on the Disney show, lent her advice behind the scenes, and publicly declared her affection for Miley every chance she got. At first, it was all laughs, hugs, and gentle encouragement, the kind of mentorship that seemed unshakable. But as Miley rocketed from wholesome TV stardom to headline-making provocateur, the public began to wonder what Dolly really thought about her goddaughter's wild new image. The questions grew louder with every headline. Miley twerked on stage at the VMAs, swung naked on a wrecking ball in a music video seen around the world, and seemed to delight in shocking audiences who still pictured her as Disney's darling. Fans speculated. Was Dolly embarrassed? Did she try to rein Miley in? Journalists pressed her for an opinion, hoping for a hint of old-fashioned condemnation or even just a raised eyebrow. But Dolly, ever the diplomat, never took the bait. She insisted in interviews that she loved Miley just as she was, and that part of growing up was making your own choices, even the ones that set the world buzzing. Behind closed doors, however, the story was more layered. Dolly understood the pressure of stardom, the way it warps even the strongest sense of self. She knew what it was like to be underestimated, dismissed, and forced to fight for creative freedom. So when the world began to turn on Miley, Dolly's support never wavered, even if her advice grew more pointed. In a candid moment during a 2023 interview, Dolly admitted she had offered plenty of tough love over the years. She told Miley to be true to herself, but also to remember that the world never forgets a spectacle and that every headline can leave a scar. Still, there were limits to Dolly's patience. Though she remained a steady force in Miley's life, she did not rush to defend every outburst or artistic stunt. If she disapproved of Miley's choices, she kept those conversations private. Publicly, Dolly chose her words carefully, expressing support for Miley's independence without endorsing every antic. Some fans saw this as disappointment, others as wisdom. Either way, the message was clear. Dolly would never throw family under the bus, but she would not rewrite her own standards for the sake of the next generation. There were rumors, of course, that Dolly tried to mediate between Miley and her critics, acting as a buffer when things got too heated. Some insiders claim Dolly counseled Miley through career crises, family feuds, and heartbreaks, urging her to remember the roots that made her strong. Others suggest Dolly sometimes stepped back, letting Miley face the consequences of her own choices. After all, Dolly herself had once fought to break free from expectations, to become more than someone else's protege. She knew that sometimes the only way to grow is to stumble in public and learn how to get up again. What Dolly never allowed, however, was a complete break. She never disowned Miley or distanced herself just because public opinion swung against her goddaughter. In a world where every celebrity feud is amplified by social media, Dolly's refusal to criticize, even in private, became her own kind of rebellion. She understood that silence could be powerful, a tool to communicate both solidarity and gentle boundaries. The result was a relationship built not just on blood and tradition, but on mutual respect and a willingness to let each other evolve. Dolly's loyalty gave Miley a safety net, the assurance that no matter how wild her next transformation, there would always be a place for her in the family circle. At the same time, Miley's unapologetic confidence challenged Dolly to see the world through new eyes, to accept that even legends can be outpaced by the next generation. But their story is not just about the bond between two artists. It is about what happens when public expectation collides with private affection. Dolly's handling of the Miley question became a lesson in how to preserve dignity, both her own and her goddaughter's, while standing firm on the values that built her legacy. It is a rare feat in the entertainment world, managing to pass the torch without letting the fire burn down everything you have worked for. The final twist? Despite the chaos and controversy, Dolly and Miley have never been closer. They have collaborated on new music, swapped stories about fame's high cost, and even performed together in a way that bridges old Nashville and new pop rebellion. In their own way, they have built a partnership defined by honesty and forgiveness, a partnership that proves legacies can survive even the wildest storms. Of course, in the world of country music, family drama is never the whole story. For every goddaughter who shakes things up, there is a critic lurking in the wings, ready to dismiss everything you have achieved. What happens when someone young and bold decides to call out a living legend, testing the patience and reputation that Dolly Parton has built over a lifetime? If you think the story ends with Miley, you are about to see just how sharp Dolly's memory and her sense of justice can be. Are you ready to meet the star who dared to call her irrelevant, and what happened when Dolly chose silence over revenge? The upstart, who called Dolly irrelevant. Country music is no stranger to generational drama, but few moments sent shockwaves through Nashville like the day a young up-and-comer called Dolly Parton irrelevant. The identity of this bold newcomer remains the subject of endless speculation, whispered about in green rooms and debated on fan forums, but everyone agrees about what happened next. It started at an industry panel in the early 2010s. With cameras rolling and industry insiders listening, a brash, newly minted chart topper shrugged off Dolly's influence, declaring, "She hasn't mattered to country radio in decades." The silence that followed was immediate and damning. While the other panelists squirmed, the comment echoed across Nashville by the next morning. Some called it arrogance, others called it ignorance, but one thing was certain: Dolly herself never uttered a word in public about it. Instead, she did what she's always done. She kept building her legacy. She ignored the drama, focused on new projects, and poured her energy into supporting young talent who respected those who came before them. Quietly, though, she declined an invitation from the same upstart to perform on his national tour. Word of the rejection spread, and other artists began to take note. Doors quietly closed, and the so-called irrelevant legend only continued to thrive while the upstart's moment in the spotlight faded fast. The episode became an instant lesson in the power of respect and longevity. Dolly's refusal to engage in a public feud was a masterclass in grace. Industry veterans praised her for choosing silence over spectacle, and fans defended her on every platform. The young artist's career never fully recovered. The story became a cautionary tale, retold by musicians and managers alike. Underestimate Dolly Parton at your own peril. In the end, Dolly proved that relevance is not measured by radio hits or headlines, but by the hearts you touch and the doors you open for others. With one quiet act, she reminded the world why her star keeps shining. while some others burn out before their time. Dolly Parton has faced rivals, critics, and changing times, but her legacy just keeps growing. For every grudge or feud, she answered with music, kindness, and a career that refuses to fade. In the world of country legends, Dolly's still the gold standard, unbothered, unforgettable, and always 2 steps ahead. Which story surprised you most? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more untold music drama.